I think it's safe to say that we all had a weird obsession with Greek mythology as a kid. It may have been brought on by different things for each of us, but it was there nonetheless. For me, it was watching the film adaptation of Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson, the Lightning Thief. My favorite scene was always when Percy and the gang went to the Parthenon replica in Nashville to get one of Persephone's pearls and fought the Hydra in the main cella. I was also really fascinated by the Parthenon in general, especially looking at that giant statue of Athena. I still can't pinpoint what makes the Parthenon so special to me, but it has always held a special place in my heart and love for art history. But I already digress. The purpose of this video is to highlight the origins, the mathematical and architectural accomplishments, the history of its uses, and the influence the Parthenon has had on architecture throughout time. The Parthenon stands as a benchmark for architecture throughout history, as well as a looking glass into the values of those who created it. So what makes the Parthenon so special? What does it represent? Part 1. Origins. The idea for the Parthenon came from a desire to honor Athena, the patron god of Athens. The previous building, a smaller temple to Athena, had been destroyed in a raid when the Persians attacked the Acropolis. Pericles, the head statesman of Athens at the time, decided to undertake a grand construction project to symbolize Athens' resilience and dominance in combat, to show that no one could take down Athens. What makes the Parthenon especially interesting is that, at first glance, it looks like it is made of right angles and straight forms, but a closer look will show that there is hardly a 90-degree angle on the entire building. The Parthenon was built like a massive optical illusion, to appear straight no matter where you looked at it from, because at a certain distance away it would look warped and unbecoming of a temple to honor the patron god of Athens if it were all 90-degree angles. An interesting example of how mathematics played into the construction of the Parthenon is the triglyphs in the entablature of the temple. Triglyphs were traditionally spaced, one between every column of a building and one in the middle of each column, according to the Doric order. However, the columns at the ends of the colonnades of the Parthenon were slightly closer to each other than in the middle to make them seem more architecturally substantial. This posed a problem for the architects because if the triglyphs were placed according to the rules of the Doric order, the metopes, or the small sculptural reliefs between the triglyphs, would then be disproportional. To address this problem, Phidias, Callicrates, and Ichthyonos created metopes that were widest in the center, tapered off at the tops and bottoms, and gradually became thinner toward the edges of the Parthenon, all to create the illusion that the triglyphs and metopes were all equidistant from one another and equal in size. Examples like this are nearly ubiquitous throughout the entire building, but that is one of my personal favorites. The goal of the Parthenon was to trick the eye of all who observe it. You would need a protractor and a lot of measuring tape to be able to perceive the subtle differences that make the Parthenon so visually appealing and iconic. Part 2. How was it built? The people credited for the construction of the Parthenon are Pericles, who made the commission, the high-status sculptor Phidias, who led the construction for the duration of the project, and the architects Ichthyonos and Callicrates. Along with spearheading the artistic elements of the Parthenon itself, Phidias is also personally responsible for many of the sculptural aspects of the temple, most notably the massive, nearly 40-foot-high statue of Athena Parthenos, which originally stood within the cella of the Parthenon, embellished with pure gold. Callicrates was a prominent architect in Greece and obviously was most well known for his work on the Parthenon. However, he may also have been responsible for many temples across Greece, such as the Hephaestion, the Temple of Poseidon in Sunion, and the Temple of Ares at Acharnae, among many others. Ichthyonos was one of the most celebrated architects in Athens at the time. While he is often recorded as working with Callicrates, it is actually more likely that they were rivals, and that Iktinos actually finished the work started by Callicrates. Alongside being a co-architect for the Parthenon, he also played a major role in designing the Temple of the Mysteries at Eleusis and the Temple of Apollo Epicurus at Basae. The actual workforce of the Parthenon was truly a mixed bag. Some were skilled artisans from across the region, while others were enslaved men. Although there were men from all walks of life participating in the construction of the Parthenon, they were all paid the same wage for their labor. The work was divided based on skill level needed, because a temple of this scale and complexity needed the best men for the job. Unskilled workers, including slaves, quarried and transported the record-breaking 22,000 tons of marble required for the construction from Mount Penteli to the Acropolis. Stonemasons, sculptors, carpenters, and metalworkers, among other skilled workers, all had integral roles in making the Parthenon the icon of Athens that lives today. The construction techniques that builders of the Parthenon employed are relatively simple compared to modern machines, but the precision with which they were able to construct the building is difficult to replicate, evident from how difficult the restoration process is turning out to be today. The Athenians used a combination of simple machines, like levers, pulleys, and inclined planes, to move and place the massive stone structures, making it one of the most impressive feats of architecture and engineering of the ancient world. Part 3. How was it used in its day? Despite its most popular descriptor, being a Greek temple, the Parthenon was never actually used as one. The cult assembly of Athena Polias congregated in a completely different temple on the northern side of the Acropolis, and the massive statue of Athena within the Parthenon was never associated with any priestesses or cult assembly. It was simply erected as a sort of votive figure to bring the building and thus the Acropolis closer to Athena. Some believe that the Parthenon was actually used as Athens' treasury, as well as the treasury of the Delian League, because many valuable objects were stored within it. The Parthenon and the entire Acropolis was also used as a site of a festival called the Pan-Athenaea, or the All-Athenian Festival. The most important festival in Athens, celebrated every year, and was celebrated every 4 years by weaving a new peplos, which is a tunic-like garment dedicated to Athena. All Athenians, except for slaves, could participate in this festival, which celebrated the birthday of Athena. The procession began at dawn and convened in front of the Dipylon Gate at the northern section of the city. The procession made its way all the way to the Temple of Athena Nike near the Propylaea, where only citizens, meaning free men, could pass and make their way onto the Acropolis. The procession passed the Parthenon and ended at the Erechtheum. After the prime of its use in ancient Greece at the height of the Athenian Empire, the Parthenon was used for many different purposes. At the tail end of the 6th century AD, it was turned into a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, a similar figure to Athena. After the conquest of Athens by the Ottomans in the 1460s, the Parthenon was converted into a mosque, and after that, in September of 1687, a munitions dump from the Ottomans was ignited by a Venetian attack which blew up the middle of the Parthenon, sadly making it the ruin we see today. The Elgin marbles, sculptures salvaged from the rubble of the destroyed building, with the permission of the Ottoman Empire, were subsequently removed in an attempt to preserve some of the art housed within the walls of the Parthenon. They are now housed in the British Museum in London, England, and there is heated debate over whether they should be returned to Greece or remain in London. Part 4. How has it influenced the history of architecture? Being one of the most famous buildings in human history, the Parthenon has of course influenced the style and architecture of countless later buildings throughout time and across the globe. Some direct influences the Parthenon and broader Greek architecture has had include famous buildings like the Lincoln Memorial and nearly every building in Washington, D.C., the Moscow University's original building, and less modern buildings like the Roman Pantheon, as well as lots of other ancient Roman architecture. Less famous buildings also have been influenced by the architectural style of the Parthenon and the conventions used in Greek temples. A popular house style during the early days of the United States was the Greek Revival, which employed the use of ornate columns on the facade of the home and a central pediment with entablature segmenting the walls from the roof. A famous example of this particular house style is, of course, the White House in D.C. The reason so many buildings in early America were modeled after Greek architecture is that Greece stood as a testament to the birth of democracy, the form of government that the United States sought to perfect at its inception. Thus, paying homage to the birthplace of democracy seemed fitting when building the iconic structures of the early United States. Going back in time to the first adopters of Greek architecture, the Romans admired the lifestyle, art, and culture of Greece so much that they emulated much of their own art and architecture from Greek styles, with some tweaks to make it their own. Roman temples can be identified for their similar columns on the front facades of the building, but often use decorative columns emerging from the walls that enclose the building, where in Greece the temple would be open to the outside and the columns actually served a structural purpose. Since Athens became a robust empire, it has been influencing the art and architecture of its contemporary civilizations and those to come centuries after its fall from prominence. So, what makes a specific building important? Is it the purpose for its construction, the mythology behind its inception, or is it the influence it has on history? Well, I think it's a combination of all of those things. The Parthenon was created out of a sense of Athenian pride and to honor the patron of the city. It was born out of a love for Greece's history and religion, and now it lives as the symbol of the birthplace of democracy and the values of the Athenian people. It is what buildings represent that make them important in the grand timeline of history, and the Parthenon represents the will of the people and the preservation of a unique history.